And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Oh, yes, we're back. Cover One, the Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown, CP Christian Page joining me as always. CP, how we doing, my man?
Man, doing well. Just a day from the Super Bowl. Two teams that I think if we kind of maybe penciled in a while back, but it's just fun. And I don't think it's the last time we see at least one of these teams in the Super Bowl in the next, 3 to 5 years maybe.
I think that's a safe bet. I think we could be seeing kind of a turning of a new leaf of maybe some new dynasties in the National Football League here. No disrespect to the New England Patriots. We've seen some, tweets from Tom Brady, a picture of him walking in or walking out of a stadium. You can't really tell. But, New Orleans, I don't really want to say they're a dynasty, but they've been consistent over the years. But, you're talking two aging quarterbacks. We've got two young quarterbacks with one team having a really good defense in San Francisco. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Certainly we could see both teams facing each other in the Super Bowl again, maybe next year or like you mentioned, in the next 3 to 5 years, certainly. So it's a lot of fun. We'll talk briefly about the Super Bowl and what we think will happen tomorrow night as we record on this Saturday morning. But we've got to jump into some Senior Bowl stuff. We never really gave a formal recap of what our thoughts were through the 3 days of practice, through the Senior Bowl game itself, media day, all the good stuff. We put out tons of content during that week, which you guys can all see on cover1.net. All you have to do is find the Cover One app for free. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I don't know what you're doing. It's a free app, and you get all of our content, all the fresh content from film breakdowns to scouting reports, all the goods right on your handheld device, whether it's your phone, iPad, however you go about your business. So go to your app store, search Cover One, and download the app for free. So let's jump into the Senior Bowl. What a week, man. I can't believe it's a week ago that it's already happened, but we're back to our normal 9 to 5 boring lives. But we look at the Senior Bowl in the rear view, and what a week it was. I mean, let's start with media day. Any players you talked to, anybody that really stood out from maybe a personality standpoint, or just was a good interview in general?
Yeah, I think when you look at the media days, it's kind of, you get an inclination of how some of the, the LSU, the Alabamas, the Clemson guys, the guys that have been kind of in the limelight for a while now, especially given their playoff situation. So I kind of like to either play in the background or just kind of get an indication of some of the small school guys. And one of those guys that popped up to me was Adam Trapman, the Dayton tight end, and a very confident player in his abilities, and had a really cool story talking about how he played quarterback in high school, didn't have too many offers, went to Dayton, and then they groomed him into be a tight end. And just watching a little bit of the film that we have of him, he's an athletic guy. I think you can put him in the scene, you can put him in line. He takes a lot of pride in that. He's one of those guys, when you look and you talk to somebody, and Russ, you can say the same thing, it's when they look you dead in the eye and they have just this confidence about them. It's like you can just feel their passion and just their leadership qualities, their maturity. And I think that's what you got from Trotman. And I really liked what I heard from him. Another guy real quickly, Chase Claypool, the Notre Dame wide receiver, has a basketball background from Canada, comes down and plays Notre Dame. Just talks about, he's a very smart X's and O's guy. There's a lot of questions thrown his way. Just talking about, how he can cut routes off just depending on what coverage is across the field from him. So those were two guys I was very impressed with at the Senior Bowl for media days.
I really like Troutman, and he was a guy that really stood out throughout the practices. And then that third day, we were up close and personal on the field watching him on the indoor facility because of the rain. And I mean, I don't want to say he was, super shifty in his routes, and he rounded a couple things, but he just looked the part. And then get home over the week and look at some of the tape. And I mean, granted, Dayton's jerseys are terrible. You can't find the guy on the field whatsoever. You need a magnifying glass. But certainly, I mean, I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but he stood out, and he's really inching up towards the top of my board for tight ends. I really like what I've seen from him. And like you said, I mean, the maturity and just how he handled himself, the confidence, I'm intrigued by that. I wish I would have got more opportunities to talk to certain guys. But for me, Devon Hamilton, Ohio State, I mean, he was just a great interview. He's got good tape. And for a guy that only played like 356 snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, on the season, to be as productive as he was, I mean, that's saying something, that he is a tough guy to block. And granted, you know, he's on a very talented defensive line with Robert Landers, Chase Young, obviously. But he was a guy that he was just so giddy and so happy that I knew who he was, that I was talking to him, and we talked football, we talked X's and O's, we talked about how he really liked playing that zero shade and one technique, and he was all about it, and it was really good. I mean, this is a guy that's 5 years at Ohio State. He was a redshirt senior this year, so he spent a lot of time learning from the Bosas, a lot of time learning from Chase Young, and then Larry Johnson, their defensive line coach. He's been just churning out defensive line talent a ton over the last couple of years. Tyquan Lewis, Jalen Holmes, obviously the Bosas, you've got Chase Young in there. So many talented players coming out of Ohio State on their defensive line. And Devon Hamilton's going to be one of those guys added to that list. And I think he'll go probably a lot sooner than maybe we're thinking, probably certainly in the top 100. So that was a guy for me. But we go to the practices. Who was a guy that really stood out in the practices for you, maybe day 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, knowing me, there's no secret that I really just kind of focus in on the trench play. And so looking mostly at offensive linemen. And there was a few that, I've done a lot of my film work and pretty much just, putting tweaks on final reports. But there's a few that I was like, okay, I need to get a better inclination of them. And I think one guy that kind of got lost in the weeds at Clemson with all the skills that they have around him with Lawrence and Higgins, Justin Ross, Travis Etienne, among others. But John Simpson, the offensive guard for Clemson, I thought he was one of the best and most consistent performers all week. I just really like his just symmetrical play. He has a nice, strong base. He anchors well. His hand placement is, I don't want to say near superb, but it's very controlled, very consistent. And he has a really patient attack plan. He's not going to over pursue, and he's not going to attack late to lose balance. He's really calm with his demeanor, and I think that definitely says a lot about just his style of play. We were watching film with him in Mobile at the Airbnb, and we came around impressed. I mean, it was a guy that he's not this sexy, mauling type guard. He's not your Quentin Nelson or whoever else it may be, just, forklifting guys. But he has some finishing ability. He has a little bit of nastiness to him. But that was definitely one guy on my list that stood out from day 1 all the way to day 3 of practice.
Yeah, he certainly stood out in a big way. I really liked what we saw from him. We talked about when watching him. He's not going to operate in space as clean as others. He's not certain, he kind of the way he pulls and the way he gets out of his stance when pulling is a little awkward, and it's definitely slow, but he's a guy that certainly, like you said, just consistent. And he had a good week of practice, no doubt about it. Strong hands for sure. Another guy, Ben Bredesen from Michigan, if we're talking trench play, I thought was very consistent. I really liked what he brought to the table. He's like Simpson in a way, not going to win every single play. He's not going to wow you with sexiness and elite footwork or anything like that, but he was just consistent. And, whether it was anchoring late or just having good hand placement or matching power with power, it was very good all the way across the board with Bredesen. And I think he really did himself some wonders for teams that are looking for interior offensive line play. Maybe that's a team like the Minnesota Vikings later on day 2 or somewhere in day 3, and they could very well be looking at both those guys. Another guy, Justin Herron from Wake Forest, he played primarily left tackle for them. He's bounced back from an injury. I believe it was a torn ACL, if I remember correctly. And he moved inside to play guard, and he checked in only at 6'3", and I think it was like 6'3", 307. So he's not overly, huge or anything like that, where like Simpson's like 6'4", 340, and he's every bit of 340. But Herron, he checks in and he plays some guard throughout the week, and every time I watched him play guard, the footwork was there. And I think, as he gets a little bit stronger with that footwork, he's going to match, I think, interior defensive linemen very well at the next level. It might take him a year to really get settled in at right guard or left guard, but he's got versatility, and he could play a little swing tackle, I think. So teams that value that and teams that are, again, looking for interior offensive line play, I would circle to those three guys. You got your true guards in Bredesen and Simpson, and then you've got a versatile guy like Haran from Wake Forest who's got experience. He's got over 50 career starts. So I came away really impressed with that lower body footwork from him. Was there any skilled guys that really stood out to you, or any running backs, quarterbacks, anything like that?
Yeah, just to put a bow on the offensive line real quick, I think overall the groups on both teams did very solid. I mean, there was only just maybe 2 to 3 guys that you're like, well, he's showing the same thing on tape that we noticed here.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of them showed that versatility, like you were just talking about, and there's some of the consistency. And I think there was some that maybe had kind of a bad week, but their film expresses otherwise. Be somebody like Nick Harris at Washington. And, he had some inabilities on film, but he just looked overwhelmed in the moment in Mobile. But he's just one guy that, all right, well, let's go back and watch the film and just see if he struggled with any of this in a major way for us to, just shy away from him completely. So I think that's what the Senior Bowl is, see a few things, go back to tape, finalize your grade, and then go forward there and look forward to the combine to complete that report. But going to your question, the skill positions, first off, let's start off with the local guy, with Michael Piron, the Florida running back. I thought he looked phenomenal. He showed some potential in the game, scoring a touchdown. He showed his receiving ability, which he went from, I think, 17, 18 targets a year ago at Florida to this past season to over 50 targets. So I think that evolution in his game is very promising going forward, just with how the league's format is with running backs and his ability to stay on the field for all 3 downs. So Piron was a guy that I think he shows a lot of contact balance, a lot of vision. He's not this get-up-and-go guy. He doesn't have elite acceleration like some of the contemporaries at the top of this class. But he has a lot of Devin Singletary vibe to me. He's not that bowling ball like him, but he shows a lot of that ability. He has a little underrated slashing ability, I think, as well. And then that receiving ability also helps him going forward. So with the local guy, but also KJ Hill from Ohio State. I think he's one of the more complete receivers, maybe in this draft as a whole. Brad Kelly wrote an awesome article on him maybe about a month or so ago, right before the Senior Bowl, talking about his evolution and just his route tree and just his versatility in that Ohio State offense. He showed every bit of that in Mobile, and I think he showed his crisp route running ability. He showed his ability to win underneath, to win vertically. He has some strong hands. He's not big at all. He is a string bean, but he is very consistent. Shows a little bit of that physicality as well, and yards after the catch too. So those were 2 skill players that definitely caught my eye in Mobile.
I need to go back to offensive linemen really fast. I can't believe we didn't talk.
We can stay on it the rest of the episode if you want.
I can't believe we didn't talk about Lloyd Cushenberry and Damian Lewis, the LSU guys. I mean, what a week for those guys. Really, I think solidified themselves as top 100 picks. And you mentioned Nick Harris and how he struggled. He certainly struggled. And I think he had a bum ankle as well near that 3rd day of practice. He struggled. I think he just doesn't have enough ass. And at 293, short arms, I don't know. I mean, he's aggressive.
Not a lot of things going for you there.
No, and I mean, he was a good guy to talk to. He really talked about how at Washington they did a ton of stuff. They did really pretty much every type of blocking that you could imagine. I mean, I talked to zone blocking with him, and he seemed very comfortable and knowledgeable in it, and he knew what he was talking about in regards to it. But again, Nick Harris struggled, but Cushenberry might have pushed himself up near the conversation for the top center. I still like Tyler Biotish, and I'm not going to change my stance on that. I'm sold on him being the best center. Yeah, he struggled a little bit early in games against Ohio State, but from the games I've seen, he looks like the same freaking kid I saw last year. So I don't see why people are jumping off the wagon on him. And if you want to jump off, that's fine. Damian Lewis, just consistent, great pad level throughout the week. So if you get a chance to watch the LSU offense, obviously watch Cushenberry, Lewis. These guys could be putting themselves in the conversation as the top interior offensive line guys in this class. But some other skilled guys, Van Jefferson, how could we not talk about him? I've been talking about him for weeks and weeks, and he might have done enough to put himself in the conversation for a late first-round pick. Maybe a team like the Green Bay Packers would be interested in him as a number 2 receiver in the slot, and he could maybe play that Randall Cobb-like role for them that they've been desperately missing now. And think about it, and we talked about this with Brett Coleman at dinner that one night with Eric and everything else, and when we talked about it, he made a really good point. Van could be a first-round pick, and we talk about small windows for teams. I've been talking about this with Luke Inman for quite a bit. Teams with small windows, they need to get the assets that can help them win now because that window gets smaller and smaller. And with Aaron Rodgers, you have a window to win a championship, no doubt about it, but they need to get some more assets, I think, offensively, because their offense just was lost against the 49ers. And had they have had a guy like Van Jefferson, it would have made a big difference for Devontae Adams and all the other guys in their offense. And Van Jefferson, if you take him in the first round, you get a 5th year rather than a 4th year contract. So a guy that's 24, you actually get him until he's at least 29. So you don't really have to worry about a second contract. You essentially get him through the productive years of his career. Maybe he becomes more productive at 29, 30, and so forth. But that's very odd. That's very rare. So if you get him now, I think in that offense, it would mesh really well. So I like him as a potential option for them at the 30th pick of the draft. Maybe they even move back a spot or two, depending on how things go with the Chiefs and the 49ers in the Super Bowl tomorrow. But I really like Van Jefferson. I think the route running is there. The footwork is there. He can catch the football clearly. I think he's done enough to certainly be put in that top 32, top 35 category. He should be one of the first picks off the board if he's there on day 2. Am I wrong for thinking that?
No, I 100% agree. And that week, him just showcasing what he could do, like we knew the potential. Like you said, you've been hyping him up for weeks and probably even months by now, but he still showed a little more. Mm-hmm. I mean, his crisp route running ability. I mean, he can just stop and start with ease, and it's so much fun to watch. It's just a clinic. But just kind of talking about the O-line group and then transitioning from the wide receiver group, saying, everybody kind of, played a solid role that week. I think you could say the same thing about the wide receiving core. I mean, there was a few that didn't really show up or just were kind of ho-hum, maybe like Kalijah Lipscomb from Vanderbilt, and Austin Mack from Ohio State was a late addition, had a decent first day and then just kind of tailed off the rest of the week. But overall, I think the wide receiver group was pretty solid, which definitely goes with the status quo of this 2020 NFL draft. But Brandon Ayuk was a guy that I was looking forward to going to see. Jim Nagy was really hyping him up in that press conference saying, hey, I've talked to a lot of teams that had Ayuk rated a lot higher than they did N'Keal Harry, who went in the first round last year. But Ayuk, he was dealing with an injury, couldn't participate that week. So he was definitely a guy that I think could have had that Van Jefferson hype, post week. Instead, we're talking about Jefferson maybe taking that void that was left by Ayuk, if you want to go that far. But I definitely think these skill position players had a really solid week. One more guy I'm going to throw out there, Joshua Kelly, the running back out of UCLA. Yeah. I was talking about P. Ryan having a solid week. I think Kelly probably was the best running back just based on performance there. Mm-hmm. He showed a little all the ability to run between the tackles and be a threat in the receiving game. I think he has that vision and that ability to get skinny. He really stays with the integrity of his blockers in front of him, and he had a solid game as well. So I think Joshua Kelly, I have no idea where projection is right now, but I think once you kind of get out maybe those top 7 to 8 running backs, it's kind of a free-for-all. So I assume probably, a early day 3 pick, maybe in that 4th round range. But I don't know. It may just take one team to fall in love with him. I think he might be a little scheme versatile too, so that definitely helps his cause as far as projection goes.
Yeah, and I mean, he showed so much patience and good vision, getting and attacking to the second level on just about every single one of his runs. So I thought he had a really good week as well, probably the best running back. And then obviously you talked about P. Ryan. I'm a big P. Ryan fan. Another guy that I've watched now after the Super Bowl, and after the Senior Bowl, and I've watched 3 additional games now, the Purdue game, the Texas game, and the Oklahoma game. And Darius Anderson, for me, I'll be writing about him. There's something we'll drop on him next week over at cover1.net. I really like this guy in his zone run scheme, and I think a team could maybe get a steal on day 3 of the draft, depending on where they value him. But those zone scheme teams, if they're looking for a running back, and I mean, I know the Lions took Kerryon Johnson, and I know, they've got a ton of needs on the defensive side of the football. They've got to figure things out. But if they move back in this draft, which I'm hoping they do, and we'll talk about it when we get into our mock draft edition of this podcast. But if they were to move back and they were to get, some additional picks from Miami, and they feel like they got some other needs taken care of, if they wanted to take this kid, I'm all for it, because they do run some zone. And the way he cuts back and his ability to see that cutback lane, find it and hit it, and then I'm not saying he runs super low and he's got great contact balance, because he does run high sometimes between the tackles and in the open field. But overall, he didn't show me enough at the Senior Bowl for me to be like, oh, he had a great week. But I saw a couple of flashes here or there. I didn't watch him enough. So then I go home and I watch the tape, and it's just like, wow. So if you go back and you watch a Senior Bowl, pay attention to Anderson, see how he did. I saw him make a couple of catches, and then obviously the tape kind of solidifies what I think of him as a zone running back, where he can fit a couple of these zone teams across the NFL, especially a team like the Lions if they were to move back. So keep an eye on him. Let's move to the defensive side of the football. We obviously have to talk. I think we're going to talk about 2 of the same guys, but we'll start at the very top. The guy that probably had the best week out of anybody, maybe there outside of a quarterback. Obviously the quarterbacks won some MVPs, but Bradlee Anae, Utah. I mean, the guy was an animal on the day of the Senior Bowl game, but he had a great practice week as well. Great work ethic. I mean, I don't think he's got great length, but he showed enough to create separation. He constantly is showing that club rip move, the chop rip move. He was very consistent. What's your spin on him? Is he in the first round conversation?
I think he definitely could be. I mean, it's, it may be a little, I don't want to say difficult to figure out schematically where you want to put him, but just based on the tools that he has, I mean, there's a whole maturation process that he's had at Utah, and he showcased every bit of his ability in the game, and he shined. I mean, like you said, all the upper body movements, his ability to get, power to speed, vice versa. I mean, he shined. But I definitely think after this week, I mean, if I'm sure some teams will consider him in the first round, at least with that back end pick. But if not, then I would definitely think he's one of the top guys going to be ripped off in day 2, because he shined, and his tape's really good. I mean, if you're just talking about, evaluating tape coming into the Senior Bowl, he's going to be one of the first guys you mentioned, and he definitely showed that and proved that in Mobile.
Well, and I spoke with we at that dinner, we were talking about it with Eric, and Eric kept telling me, like, I don't think he's because obviously I'm talking Lions, and he's like, I don't think he's a fit for them. I disagree. I mean, Devin Kennard, Romeo Quora, those guys play very similar roles to him, or he would play similar roles as those guys in their defense. And those guys have expiring contracts coming up after this season. So if he's there at 35, and with the Lions having all of that extended work with him during the Senior Bowl week, I think that's a really possible landing spot. One team that I'm afraid of, I know they're stacked, but I'm just afraid of at 32, San Francisco, just saying, hey, screw it. Let's get this kid in case D Ford gets injured. Obviously, we have Solomon Thomas, but Thomas is not the same player that they thought he was out of Stanford. They've got obviously some contracts that they've got to negotiate and figure out. So maybe they're not able to get somebody back on their defensive line. That could be a possibility for them to look at Bradlee Anae. And I think that's just like worst case scenario. That's just a scary, great defensive line. Obviously, maybe Seattle, maybe they'll value him at 27. Or Miami at 26. There's a couple of teams, I think, at the back end, like you mentioned. Another player defensively, Troy Pride Jr., defensive back out of Notre Dame. He had a great week. I thought he was the best corner down there. The footwork was really good for him. He was a guy that on that third day, we saw him up close and personal during those one-on-ones with corners and wide receivers, and he was constantly coaching up the guys that he was working with and constantly coaching up himself. He knew a lot about inside and outside leverage. So I'm very intrigued by him. I think he did enough to probably put himself in the top 100 of the draft process. I don't know if he was there prior to the Senior Bowl, but I think he is now. And was he a guy that was on your radar going into the Senior Bowl, or did you not really watch him and the Senior Bowl had you blown aback a little bit?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of both. Just kind of, just being introduced to him and then seeing his overall ability. I mean, I
Hmm.
think that was kind of this cornerback group and maybe as a whole in the draft. And we can just go ahead and say the defensive backs group as a whole in this draft is kind of ho-hum. There's a couple of really superb athletes. You got Xavier McKinney, Jeff Okudah, Christian Fulton, who, was a late scratch in this game. But I think anybody that can really just make some waves in this defensive backs class, and Pride definitely did it. A few of those Notre Dame guys did it in Mobile. So that was definitely something that was very impressive to me going forward. But going back to just talking about the defense as a whole, I think one guy that was pretty much a highlight reel all week in practice, Josh Uche from Michigan. I mean, he's kind of that edge player, outside linebacker. That's going to be something else that, if you trust your coaching staff in those front seven personnel pieces, I think he could be a stud. He shows unbelievable lower body quickness. I mean, there's multiple plays where he's timing the punch of the offensive tackle, bending around him and just getting them to almost completely miss and just make them look like fools over being over aggressive, overextending, and him just finishing on the play. I think he showed that pressure as well with Bradlee Anae on the opposite side in the game. So I think Uche was definitely one of those guys, which I actually have his all 22 popped up in my tab right now. So I'm going to get going on him once we hit the stop recording button here. But he's definitely a guy that is really he was a highlight reel all week. And I definitely think, again, like I said, and I'll stress it over and over again, I think the Senior Bowl week is you go in with some notes on these guys, and then they do something or don't do something that turns you back to the tape. And that's definitely what Josh Uche did in his week in Mobile.
He certainly did. I mean, I thought the first day he looked like okay, and then he just kind of figured it out. He got his feet wet. He got his feet underneath him. And I think what made me hesitate on him during the week was because of that first day seeing him in coverage and getting worked on by Bryson Hopkins, but then all of a sudden he puts the work on him and he's in great coverage and he figured things out. So that shows me he either went back, studied the tape, figured out what these guys do, or he's being coachable and he's listening to his coaches and he's applying what he's learning. And I mean, he's a little bit undersized. What was he, 240, I believe? So
yeah,
that's,
I think 6'1", 240, something around that.
So a little bit undersized, but I think he could easily put on 5, maybe 10 pounds. 10 pounds might be a little much. It might slow him down, but maybe 5 more pounds, or even if you keep him at what you got. I mean, you got a guy that maybe on first and second down, first down, you play him in the box to try to stop the run. Second down, maybe you drop him into coverage or you have him rush the passer. And then third down, he either rushes the passer or he drops back into coverage. And I'm thinking, he's not going to go play a deep third or something, but curl to flats, mid hook, I don't think it's that much of a problem for him to drop into that zone. I don't think I love him in man coverage. So if you're doing that and having a matchup against tight ends, best of luck, but you never really know. But yeah, he certainly stood out. Again, so many teams are probably going to be circling him and putting him up on their board, and we'll see, exactly where he falls in the draft. I don't know if he's a first-round guy, but you never know. I need to know about a certain guy because the third day he had an interception, and I had no idea he was there at all. And you were talking about him, and I was like, dude, I haven't seen him all week. Like, was he a late addition? And it was Logan Wilson, Wyoming linebacker, in a linebacker class that I don't want to say is poor, but it's certainly it doesn't have the potential that it did going into the year. Logan Wilson, what do you know about this guy? You were hyping him up to me on that third day.
Yeah, he was a former defensive back that moved to linebacker, and there could be some reports that say, no, he wasn't as athletic or as quick enough as far as playing, in that safety role. But at linebacker, I mean, that intelligence just carries over there. He's always in the right spot at the right time, and that goes to his ball skills. I think 4 or 5 interceptions this past season for the linebacker, but he's not this overly athletic guy, but I think he can match up man on man. I think he's really good as far as staying with his integrity of the zone, and I do think he has that acceleration to maybe not be a sideline-to-sideline player, but at least to affect, the movement of the ball. So he was definitely a guy that I don't want to say stood out to me at Mobile, but when he had that play at the end And when he made certain plays throughout the week, I'm like, yep, that checks out because that's what he showed on film. And so, I'll have maybe that's an article idea coming soon since he's not that well known. I mean, I still think he's a day 3 pick. He's not going to jump into, this top 75, top 100 conversation, to my knowledge, unless he does something at the combine or this pro day that makes, personnel go back and be like, yeah, maybe this guy is worth the top 100 pick. But like you said, a little bit of the scarcity in that linebacker position and being in middle linebacker, outside linebacker, wherever it may be, there's a little bit of question across the board. So maybe that does bump him up a little bit, assuming that, a lot of teams enjoyed what they saw in Mobile. So, yeah, Logan Wilson was a guy that I came in. I wanted to see maybe a little bit more, but I think if you maybe don't call out his name that often, maybe that's not a horrible thing. Maybe that's just he's just getting his work done. So, I'll have something on him, let's say in the next couple weeks, just to get an idea and just kind of hype him up a little bit and say, hey, he actually is a legit NFL prospect.
Let's just put him on the Baltimore Ravens now. He'll have a great 8 to 10 year career, and it'll be all good. I mean, he's listed at 6'2", 250 on their site. So to be a former defensive back and then just move into that linebacker role and look the part, I'm certainly intrigued to see what kind of film we have on him, and I'll circle back to him for sure. After that third day, he certainly stood out quite a bit. So, I mean, I don't really have much else on the defensive side or really the offensive side. I did have a podcast that I did during the Senior Bowl. You were writing a report on the first day of practice, so I talked with Brad Kelly on wide receivers. I pieced together an interview with Jonah Tolles of the Draft Network. We talked during the media session in between the North and South media sessions. So there's an interview on there. So that's the latest episode. And then obviously you'll have this one with me and CP talking Senior Bowl stuff. But I mean, that was the Senior Bowl. The North team won. The Lions don't get anything for winning that football game other than obviously some extensive research and knowledge of these players. So hopefully they utilize it and they draft some Senior Bowl studs during the 2020 NFL draft. The same for the Bengals as well. But let's move forward. Let's talk some mock draft stuff. You and I will be going head-to-head with a mock draft to see how many people we can piss off on Monday after the Super Bowl. So you'll have one, I'll have one. We'll see kind of the similarities or differences. Obviously, I think everybody's kind of expecting at this point Joe Burrow at 1, Chase Young at 2. But during your research of who you, I guess, like in certain fits, I mean, you don't have to give me the exact player to team, but maybe there's a team out there that, as you were doing some research, maybe there's a team need that kind of drew your eye throughout the process. I know your mock draft's not fully done, neither is mine, but is there a team that you look at in this first round that you say, hey, everybody's saying they're going to draft this, but I actually see this?
That's tough. I think we talked about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Just overall, I'm kind of struggling where to pinpoint my first wide receiver. I mean, we talked about how talented this class is, especially, with the Alabama duo and CeeDee Lamb. And Arizona at 8 is that attractive spot. I mean, if you want to make the case for the New York Giants at 4, you can. But I think maybe they're needed at tackle and just best player available overall. Which could be a wide receiver, depending on their board. But I think they may go in that direction instead. Miami looking at 5. I think you can make a case that they have a quarterback right there, most likely probably Tua or Justin Herbert. But so I think Arizona maybe, even though they may have to pass up on that wide receiver and just solidify that offensive line. I mean, you have your franchise quarterback with Kyler Murray, and I think you have enough in that wide receiving core to wait for the second round because this class is so deep. And I think there's a lot of guys, early to midway in that top 50 that you could definitely draft as a wide receiver 1/2. And maybe that's the decision that Arizona has to make, because if you're looking at tackles, maybe Jedrick Wills is on the board, maybe Tristan Wirfs is on the board. I think solidifying that offensive line overall is a better decision now than just jumping all on board on one wide receiver, even though you may have your number 1 receiver left on the board and maybe a receiver hasn't been touched. But Arizona is kind of that team I'm struggling with right now because, 1, the position with wide receiver, and 2, just their needs in general, even though best player available could be, tacking on maybe Jared Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb at this point. But I also think one of those offensive linemen, quote unquote, falls to them. I think it's going to be hard to pass up or really make a legitimate case to pass up one of those guys for a wide receiver when this class is so deep.
I'm with you there. I mean, I was, flirting around with mine today and playing around with it. And then every time I got through a certain spot, I was like, well, maybe this is where their first receiver goes. And we've talked about Arizona before as this landing spot for wide receivers. They do have a need for an offensive tackle, and maybe they do consider a Jedrick Wills or a Tristan Wirfs. But to be honest, I think after Henry Ruggs gets done with the combine, he gets done with his pro day, I think he's going to be the first receiver off the board. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. And I think with how this draft goes, Tua in the top 5 somewhere, Justin Herbert probably in the top 6. Who really knows what Carolina is going to do? Obviously, Arizona is going to have some talent in front of them, but I continue to just circle back to Henry Ruggs for them. I think in that offense with Kyler Murray, you got Fitz basically, on a year-to-year basis at this point, maybe playing his last year. We really don't know. I know he signed one more year, but Christian Kirk, could he be on his way out? Is he really a fit there? He's not staying healthy. That's the problem. So maybe this is their way to really solidify their wide receiver group. I know they've got Akeem Butler, but he got injured. You do have Andy Isabella, so Isabella underneath. You've got Fitzgerald. You've got Henry Ruggs as that deep ball threat. I mean, he scored, 24 touchdowns on 95 or 98 receptions in his career. So he's touching, he's touching the football and scoring almost, what is that? Like 1 out of every 4 throws or something like that. So it's like 25% of his targets. So it's an incredible ratio for him and on the production that he's had that I think just teams are going to fall in love with. And I know we've talked highly of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, but I think Henry Ruggs, Arizona, I don't know. I love that fit. One player, I don't want to bash the guy, but Jeff Okudah in the top 5, I just struggle with it. I really do. I don't feel as confident about Okudah as I did like Denzel Ward or Marshawn Lattimore or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could see Okudah falling a little bit and maybe going in that 9 to 12 range, like I've mentioned before. I think he's more in that range with Christian Fulton. One player I could see fall a little bit, Jerry Jeudy, like we talked about with wide receivers. I could see, maybe in that 15 to 20 range. Denver obviously is a really good sweet spot for him. But 7, Carolina, that's the team that for me, I think linebacker is a big need for them. And you lose Luke Kuechly, you don't have Thomas Davis anymore. I think linebacker is a serious need for them. And I think if Clemson linebacker Isaiah Simmons is there on the board, he makes way too much sense. So I think that will be the pick right there that maybe makes the domino fall for a couple of offensive linemen, maybe a defensive lineman like a Derek Brown if he's still on the board. And again, like you mentioned, wide receivers. But if we move back into the later part of the draft, we move on from Herbert, Tua, Burrow. There's got to be a 4th receiver or a 4th quarterback in here somewhere. Is it New England? Is it the Saints? Is it Tampa Bay? Is it the Colts? Which one of those 4 teams or another team is going to fall in love with a quarterback?
Yeah, I can't tell you what team. I can tell you it's going to be Jordan Love, whichever team is selecting that 4th quarterback. That's my only bold prediction I have. And I think you could make a case for all of them. I mean, I know New Orleans has kind of been that popular pick, especially within the last week with, the rumors that Drew Brees is on his way out, with, Russell Wilson giving up his starting spot in the Pro Bowl to Drew Brees. And then that's like, oh no, media, we got to run with it. Is this Drew Brees' last time picking up the football in a professional setting? So I definitely think that that says a lot about possibly what they're going to do. And even if it's not Brees' last year, you can still draft a quarterback late. I mean, that Saints roster is loaded regardless. So you're not going to sacrifice really losing an all-star caliber player. I mean, you might, but I mean, when you have the opportunity to get your franchise quarterback, maybe get him groomed under Brees for 1 year, I think that's definitely a risk that you can take in New Orleans' position just based on the personnel and the coaching that they already have. So definitely think New Orleans is one of those teams. I'm not going to say because I'm just assuming that Tannehill is locked up for Tennessee for a year or two, but let's just say it doesn't work out. I don't know how committed Tennessee is to not taking a quarterback in round 1 because let's just say Jordan Love is one of those 4 quarterbacks picked in the first round, then your chances are looking a little thin in this draft. So maybe they stick around with it, stick around with Tannehill for one more year, and then look to next year's draft, which I don't know how good the class is outside of those top 2-3 guys. So I definitely think that there will be a quarterback selected from 20 to 32. Can't tell you what team necessarily. I think Indianapolis could make some moves there, even though Jacoby Brissett has a contract situation. But I can almost guarantee that Jordan Love will be that 4th quarterback taken in round 1.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think he's probably in that 13 to 20 range. I think he's probably a top 20 pick. And I say that simply because I really think the Jets and the Raiders at 11 and 12, and maybe even Cleveland at 10, are in a sweet spot to trade back. You know, we talk about Detroit all the time, and the draft really starts with them, whether they stay or move back. I think the draft also could have some impact at 10, 11, or 12. The Jets would be smart to move back from 11 to, let's say, 24 with the Saints. And the Saints get in front of some teams. They get their quarterback in Jordan Love. And the Jets move all the way to 24. They get a plethora of draft picks. They can add some wide receivers later in the draft, add to their defense. They could take a player like Austin Jackson out of USC if he's there, the offensive tackle. They could look at an edge rusher. Maybe a Julian Okwara is there. Or, you know, maybe there's a linebacker that they could pair with, I'm blanking on his name. Who's the linebacker they signed? C.J. Mosley. And maybe they fall in love with like a Patrick Queen or a Kenneth Murray. Or maybe, there's a receiver there. Maybe a T. Higgins or something like that. So I think there's a ton of options. Obviously, you could say that about every team, but I really think 11 and 12 could be a potential trade back spot. Is there a running back that we could be seeing? I'm not saying, in your potential mock draft, but is there a running back we could see taken in the first round?
Maybe one. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's like last year with Josh Jacobs, be picked, 24th overall. So maybe that's kind of what we see here. Again, I'm just going back to Tennessee. Derrick Henry, he has the opportunity to be either franchise tagged or be the highest paid running back in all of football. Save your opinions for that, but he was one of the most dominant players in football this year. Really the reason why Tennessee was in the AFC Championship game. So, if Tennessee just doesn't like, maybe that contract, those numbers going forward, then maybe they take a stab at a running back late because they may have their opportunity to pick any running back in this entire class. But I think when you look down the list, I don't really see a glaring need at running back for that many teams, especially to sacrifice some of these, maybe more positional needs and best player available. Yeah. Seattle's always an interesting cause, but I still think they're maybe committed to Chris Carson and Rashad Penny. You never know at their running backs, but they seem to always get production from there as long as they have Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll there. Baltimore with Mark Ingram had a solid year, and Justice Hill a year ago was a draft pick for them. So I don't know where they're looking at. Aaron Jones had a great year for Green Bay. Kansas City just has a multitude of running backs along with San Francisco. So I don't really see maybe in that range, and unless you're looking at teams with
Miami at 26,
like Miami.
Maybe?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That would be the only one I think you could make a case, because outside of those, just looking from, picks 20 to the end, 20 with Jacksonville, Leonard Fournette's there. With Philadelphia, I think they're fine at running back with Howard and some other pieces. Mm-hmm. Singletary with the Bills, the Patriots with Sony Michel and a couple other guys. Alvin Kamara with New Orleans, Dalvin Cook with Minnesota. I think Miami's maybe the only team in that range at 26 that you could make a really strong case to just kind of, add another skill position, especially given the other picks they have early in the draft.
For sure. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I'm excited for our mock drafts that drop on Monday. You guys, of course, like I mentioned, download the Cover One app, get the push notifications. The moment those mock drafts appear, they will push notify to your phone, and you will get that notification that, hey, new mock drafts. So it's for us, first ones of the year. So be sure to check it out. Be sure to find us on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, @ Christian Page, and bash us for mocking bad players to your team. Let's talk Super Bowl, and then we'll wrap this thing up. I mean, I don't think there's much else to talk about for the mock draft stuff, because you could be here all day talking scenarios and situations and players and whatnot. But Super Bowl is tomorrow, Sunday. What is it? 6:42 kickoff. Always an odd time, but it'll go to midnight somehow. And it's going to be a good football game, no doubt about it. I mean, we've got a really good defense in San Francisco. We've got a pretty good offense in San Francisco, but we've got an offense, as we all know, Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, just lighting the world on fire, it seems like, since he's been the starter for them. What's your spin on this game? What's your expectations and your final prediction?
It's hard to bet against San Francisco. I mean, they've been just so dominant, maybe just the second half of the NFL season, including the postseason. And then, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo didn't have to do too much in the last game over the Green Bay Packers. You had Mostert running all over the place with a career day. You have a multitude of running backs with San Francisco. You have decent skill players at the wide receiver position. I think your offensive line is fine, very experienced, and their defense. I mean, some of the best, the personnel that they have is one thing, but the scheme and just dominating factor, like, hey, you can run whatever you want to run against us, but we're not going to change our status quo. We're going to sit there and hit you in the mouth. We're going to answer every single time. Starts with up front, like we were talking about earlier in the show. Their secondary, I think, is fine, and they have a lot of underrated players, as in Dre Greenlaw, a few years removed from Arkansas, Fred Warner, the middle linebacker. I think they're two underrated guys that could start for any team in the NFL. And it's hard to pick against San Francisco. I know the inexperience somewhat with Kyle Shanahan at the helm, but it's not like Andy Reid knows how to win Super Bowl games. And I don't mean to say that in a rude way.
Wow, shots fired.
Yeah, shots fired for sure. But I don't think that's definitely 100% a reason why you can say, well, he's never been there before as a head coach. Then I don't think that can really be used as a valid excuse or the only reason to say that San Francisco can't win this game. But as far as Kansas City goes, I don't know how much their offense can be stopped, but I can tell you this much. If they have some of those slow starts that they've been accustomed to in this postseason, I think San Francisco takes advantage of it. And then Kansas City is going to have to, keep just doing what they're doing and rally behind Patrick Mahomes and just the skill players on that offense. But I don't think Kansas City's rush defense is good enough to stop this San Francisco attack. And sure, I think Garoppolo is going to have to throw for more than 100 yards in this game to win. But I think San Francisco is just too strong top to bottom to let Kansas City get this one. So I'm going San Francisco. Really have a score, maybe, 31 to 20. We'll go with that.
I mean, I like both teams. Can they both win? I mean, at this point, I would love to see Andy Reid get a ring, just simply because, he's older than Kyle Shanahan. I think Shanahan will be coaching for probably a lot longer than Andy Reid at this point. But you never know. And we talked about at the beginning of the show how both teams, there's a pretty good chance we could see them back in the Super Bowl again multiple times in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think regardless of what happens, I think both teams will eventually end up winning a ring between now and the next 3 to 5 years with what they've got going on. But I'm kind of with you. The defense is just so good. But I'm just going to be different because I don't like to have the same opinions all the time. So I'm going to go with the Chiefs. And I'll say 31-28. I think it'll be something like that. Maybe they win with the 20 seconds left on the clock with a field goal. I just think the big play threat that Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, what this team's able to do, and then even a guy like Sammy Watkins who said, he might take 2020 to just rest up and prepare for maybe life after football or prepare for, a couple more years. Obviously, he's been battling through injuries, so we'll see. Maybe he goes out with a bang and gives us one last big performance. We'll see. But, I love the 49ers defense. I really do. I like what Jimmy Garoppolo is able to do, but I just think I'm going to go Chiefs. I think it's going to be one of those things where Andy Reid goes out on top. Then maybe we start speculating, are they going to be getting a new coach, this, and that, and stuff like that moving forward. So we'll see. But I like the Chiefs in the game. It's tomorrow. I don't know exact time, 6:37, something odd like that. So keep an eye out for that. Do you have any bets on the game through a sports book or anything like that?
No, I don't do that because then I lose track on focusing on the game. But this would be the game to do it because I really have no interest in who wins. And I say that in a positive way. Like you said, you made the case, saying, it'd be nice to see both teams win. And they're probably going to be at least one of them probably going to get a ring. I mean, obviously this time around, but probably another one here in the next 3 to 5 years because just of the youth that they have and the coaching ability. But so this would be the game I would bet on, I guess, but I don't do that. I don't know why, but this would be a hard bet to take because just of how good and how close this game could really be.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. But obviously, you guys enjoyed the Super Bowl. I hope you guys enjoyed all the Senior Bowl stuff that we discussed today, all the Senior Bowl stuff that we put on the website. Be sure to smash the follow button on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, @_Christian Page. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and review to the podcast. The more ratings we get, the more subscriptions we get, the more positive reviews, everything like that, the more episodes we can do throughout the week. So please stop limiting us to just one episode a week. Give us all of your feedback so we can make this the best draft podcast around. But for CP, I'm Russell Brown. Until next week, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.